Hey there YouTube, it's officially December and it's way too cold and dark to be working outside anymore. So it's time for me to finally get to a project that I've been kicking around for about 3 years. I've really thought about it and gone over it, and I think I'm finally ready to do it. In a previous video you may have seen me cleaning out some wild duck nests that are, and one of them was on a floating island that's in the middle of the pond. So that was actually the second version of that island that I built. The first was a complete disaster, we're not even going to talk about it. But that one that's currently out there works pretty well. I mean, I had 2 or 3 ducks that like hatched some eggs on there. So it was pretty successful, but there's a lot of improvements to be made. So I believe this new design that I've come up with, which kind of leverages everything I've learned in the last few years about ducks, floating dock design, and even hydroponics, is going to work out really well. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll kind of explain along the way how the current island works and how this island is going to work and what makes it so different. Okay, so here is the kind of rudimentary design. So there's going to be 2 sections to this. One is the frame that's going to hold the barrels, which is what this is. And then there's going to be a top box which rides on top of it, which holds the soil and the nests and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to start with the frame right here. So this is kind of just, it's an 8x8. I have kind of corners so it looks a little bit more natural. Sharp corners don't look a little bit too man-made. And it's going to hold 5 barrels. So the 5 barrels should give me about 2,200 pounds of buoyancy. Actually a little bit more, because this entire frame is going to be submerged underwater. The box that sits on top of it is going to be so full of soil and rock and weight that it's going to push this whole thing down. So even the further down it gets, the more buoyant it gets. It's kind of a basic of how that all works. But so this is what we're going to build first in this video. I'm gonna finish this up, and then once I get this done, I'm gonna get this out of the pond, float it out there. I'm gonna place the box on top of it that's gonna hold the soil, and then I'm gonna have to do it from there. So it's gonna get so heavy I won't be able to move it around anymore. We're about 200 yards, 300 yards from the pond right now, so it's a little bit hard to move everything. This is kind of what the side view is gonna look like. So we're gonna have this frame sitting on the barrels, and then on top is this box. The water level is going to be right up almost to the top, maybe 2 inches down, and then we're going to have holes, small holes in here that so the water can seep in, right, and use that capillary action to keep the soil moist. We're also going to have kind of little areas cut out that are sealed for the duck nest to go in, because you don't want to have a duck nest right on a wet soil, right? So their nests will be dry, but everything else will be kind of moist. I've kind of done a lot of drawings here in this, ideas here in this book. So anyway, let's get to work. I don't want anyone to die from boredom, so I'm going to go ahead and speed up this footage. I'll put some music on, and I'll kind of just narrate over the important bits. Share some pictures I got of the old island with some animals that have visited it. Let's see here, what do we got for public domain music here? Let me put something on. So I have built a floating dock before. In fact, you'll see it a little bit later in this video. But I'm using kind of the same methodology because that worked really well. So I'm starting off here doing just the outside outline of it. The straight boards are 2 feet or 4 feet long, and then the ones that are cut at the ends for angles are whatever the square root of 8 is, 2.9 something. So we're just kind of assembling it here. The barrels I'm using are over on the left there, as you'll see. So I hadn't really realized how big it was going to be until I got to this point, but now it's quite big. I could actually camp on this thing if I really wanted to, but the dog is provides some scale. So the next step here is to start the framing. Really the critical part of the framing is that you need to have the proper spacing to capture the barrel. You don't want the barrel to be poking through the frame. So I figure out how to do that here in a little bit. I believe that the distance I wanted up ending was 17.5 inches, and that allows the barrel to sit up about 3 or 4 inches up inside of the frame without going past it. and then there's going to be some vertical or some cross bracing to prevent the frame from bowing. But you'll kind of see here as we get a little bit further. And see what else here. So I'm using deck screws. So this whole frame is going to be submerged. So you don't want to use normal screws because they'll rust. And galvanized nails would also work, but they, do tend to rust. So I'm going with deck screws, which I think should be fine. I really like deck screws because they don't split the wood, and they drill in way faster than just normal wood screws, way smoother. And those are actually pretty cheap. I think they're 20 bucks for that huge box that I got there, so not a bad deal. We'll see how they hold up. Since this is all going to be underwater, I'm guessing the lifetime of this thing should be 10 to 15 years is kind of what I'm hoping for. I guess we'll find out. I'm still kind of figuring out what I'm going to use for materials for the top. I guess we'll get to that later. Alright, so now I'm working on the first braces for the barrel. So once I get this set, I'm going to take that measurement, and then I'm going to apply that same measurement to all the other barrels so that they all ride at the same height. So this is kind of a tedious process, but I only have to really do it once. So right there I think I have it. I think it's about 1 inch off the ground. Maybe I'm doing a little bit tighter. So it's 1 inch off the ground. That means that it's not going to hit whatever's above it, because the whole thing flips upside down right now. So I'm doing that on the other side. And cutting another one. This was probably the longest, the most tedious thing to do in this whole project. Because you're cutting 2 angles at an inside, and it's hard to get them to line up right, because it's nothing's straight, of course. Let's talk about lumber real quick. So right now, when I film this, lumber is very expensive. I think each of these boards is like $14 each, which is usually, I think it's usually like $6 or $7 for pressure treated 2x6s. So I also noticed that instead of it, like when you buy, usually when you buy an 8-foot long board, they'll give you like 8 1/4 inch, or 8 1/2 even. But these boards were like almost under 8. So I think it's due to the shortage. They're really skimping on what you get. Alright, as we continue on with the framing here, now I'm going to be doing the front and back barrel, which I actually did make a mistake here, which we'll see later. I have to redo part of this. I hadn't really thought this over as much as I usually do when I design something. So there was a mistake with the barrels kind of conflicting with each other, which you will see. I do usually do this kind of work at night after the kids go to bed, so this was probably about 8 o'clock at night. I'm usually a little bit tired, and I don't really, sometimes I forget, I'm not at the top of my game here when I'm thinking, so this does happen. Alright, that's the center barrel was kind of in there, and sometimes the dog leaves at night and goes and barks outside, which is very annoying, but looks like she's being pretty good today. So now I'm just finding the center line to do more bracing for the final 2 barrels here. And yeah, it's kind of dark out there when I got that's my crappy saw, because it's at the barn. My nice one I'm still using to remodel my house. So that saw does not have a good blade on it. It's not very strong. So with wet wood, it's hard to cut through. So that was the start of my problem right there. When I put that barrel in, I started to notice that it's barely going to fit in there, and then I'm wondering if it's going to conflict with the barrel that's in the center that's perpendicular to it. I hadn't quite figured it out at this point, but obviously because I'm still continuing on. But alright, this is obviously looks like the next day, and finishing the screwing. Dog's asleep still. Got my hat on. Must be colder. My barn looks fairly clean in this picture. It's nice, and it's gonna be rougher to do the top part, because I think I'm gonna have to build a lot of that on the island as it's floating. I guess we'll find out about that. Alright, finishing up the bracing here. So what else are we talking about? So for the I guess while this is kind of going on, this is kind of slow, we can talk about you know, the kind of stuff we're seeing on the island. So I have seen during the springtime, actually, here's a couple pictures. There's a lot of ducks, and I see many different varieties, but right here is wood ducks, and I think there's a couple of mallards, and another picture of this. But I think that I counted like 15 ducks, and they had kind of taken over the nest, and here's another picture where they had actually had some offspring. So one of the problems with the old island, or the current one, is that once the ducks hatch, they can't get back up in there, which ducks actually do like to do that. They go back into their nests for a while to, you know, stay warm under their mom. So if they can't get back up, they just have to go in the grass. So for wood ducks, that's actually normal, because if you look up a wood duck nest online, you'll see that they typically nest in trees, and then when the young hatch, they jump out and they can't get back up in there. But since there's a few more predators on my pond, they kind of need a safe place they can go and not be in the grass and get picked off by a raccoon or coyote or something else. So also mallards are very big here, so they also have used the nest before. They usually kind of take turns throughout the year, and we get about 3 or 4 broods over the year. And I also have some otters at the pond, which they're kind of going to be the wild card here, because the otters do kill and eat ducklings, which may have been what's going on with some of the ducks that have been growing up, because they kind of just disappear. So yeah, they're a recent. They just showed up recently, and they kind of drove off. There used to be beavers, and they drove those off. So now it's just these 3 otters that I've seen. We also get the heron out there. There's quite a few herons that show up, and they like to land on the island, actually, and they fish off of it, because fish will hide under underneath it. So they weigh quite a bit, so it actually has to be fairly strong so it doesn't tip, because they like to sit right on the edge. And there is other varieties of ducks. I believe these are fish-eating ducks here, but yeah, it's there's quite a lot of animals that come by throughout the year. Alright, so at this point I realized that the barrels aren't going to work, so I'm going to have to rotate the 2 outer barrels, which is not as strong structurally, but I think once I put the subfloor on, it'll kind of tie everything together. It should be fine. Regarding the subfloor, I'm considering using, instead of using marine grade plywood, I'm looking at using like tile backer board, which is made out of cement. It's heavier, but it does not degrade, and it's also way cheaper. So that's probably what we could be using. We'll see. So here I am unscrewing all my work and trying to fix this here. This is on Saturday. So on Saturday I was planning on just taking the frame out, but had to do this quick modification. It took me a few minutes here to fix this. And then I think after this it's actually a clip that happened earlier, but I'm going to be sealing the barrels up. So we'll talk about barrels in a little bit here. Alright, so I was a little worried, but yep, all the barrels fit. Everything fits without rubbing against each other, so just gonna add a couple of more little cross braces, just so that you don't want the wood to flex, right? Because the barrels will push up over time, so you don't want the barrels that are running, lengthwise with them to bend, because then that barrel will ride a little bit higher and it'll throw your level off for the whole island. So it's always good to have a lot of bracing so that there's minimal bending. In fact, I think on my dock I came back with like 2x4s and laid them flat. So like in this picture here, it would be against the concrete, but not touching the barrel, and that also gives it a little more stiffness. But for this, I'm not going to worry about that. Like I said, there's going to be like a subfloor to tie it all together here. Alright, last few screws. Yep, it's all fitting in. Looks pretty good. Alright. Yep, nice and level. Alright, now we're going to do the barrels. Okay, so sealing barrels. There's a couple quick tips here. I've had really good experience or luck with this. You want to start with a clean, obviously barrel without any big divots or scratches. It hasn't been used a lot. You want to check the bungs on each. There's usually 2 bungs. You want to make sure that the gaskets are in very good condition and that they're not cracked. The plastic bungs aren't cracked. I always put silicone on the threads. Silicone doesn't stick to this plastic very well, but it does provide more kind of like a gasket material in the threads to prevent water from seeping through. Don't want to over tighten them too much here. I'm tightening them pretty hard, but I don't have the right tool for it. That's why I usually run some silicone over. Once they're tightened, you can see me do it here. I'll run some silicone over the top just to make sure it's sealed, even though that won't really stick too well. And I think the most important thing is the temperature at which you seal these barrels up. So I took the 2 extremes that these are going to see, which would probably be about 30 degrees Fahrenheit up to maybe 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and took the difference. So that's 55. So fortunately for me, my unfinished basement here is always right around 55 degrees because it's mostly underground. So that's why I let them sit in the basement for a few hours to normalize that temperature, and then I seal them up. Pressure and temperature are related to each other linearly. So if the pressure increases twice, the temperature increases twice as much, the pressure is going to be twice as high. So what you want to avoid is them collapsing if it gets really cold, and you don't want them blowing up if it gets really hot. So that's kind of why you aim for the halfway point. Alright, now it's time to bring it to the pond. At this point I was a little unsure of how well this was going to work. I kind of had planned on doing this, but I didn't know if it was going to fall apart or the whole frame was going to break or whatever. It is a long way to the pond down a steep hill, but it actually wasn't too bad here. So I just used my little forks on the tractor and picked it up and carried it down. It might look big. I mean, it looks big, so it looks heavy, but it's really not that heavy. It's really 11 pieces of 2 by 6 by 8 foot. So it's probably, if I had to guess, maybe less than 200 pounds, this whole thing. So no problem for the tractor. And it's not heavy enough to kind of pull itself apart, right? Like it's not going to blow any screws up or anything from the weight, as long as you don't go too crazy with it. So let's watch this action here. This is exciting. It hasn't fallen apart yet. Go ahead and shift it into normal gear. And we're going down there. Nice and slow. Alright, this is the final assembly here. You'll notice I haven't actually leak checked any of these barrels. So I got like 2 or 3 in, and then I remembered, oh yeah, you gotta leak check them. So you'll kind of see me shift some around and move around to make sure that they're not leaking out of the bungs. So it's really not too hard. I just kind of rolled it in, muscled it in a little bit, not too bad. So now I'm starting to check them for leaks, make sure there's no air coming out, and then we're just dropping them in there. I was curious about how tippy this would be. So this is actually quite a bit tippier than I thought, but I think it's because the barrels are riding so high. Once you get some more weight on this thing, I think it's going to be pretty stable because it's square, and it should be pretty resilient to, like, if you stand on the side it might tip, but it's not going to be as tippy as it is as you see here in a little bit. So I'm getting the rope ready so it doesn't float away. It's still actually tied up at the dock right now. I haven't done any more work on it. I'm still trying to pick out a couple materials, but here we go. It's floating, looks pretty level, and I'm gonna give it a little test here in a second. Well, that was actually a lot easier than I was expecting. I mean, the weather cooperated, nice and sunny, no wind, and it's pretty warm out actually too. So I still need to decommission the other duck island over there. I'll do that one of these days. And then of course I need to build the dirt box that goes on top of this thing. That's going to weight it down. This whole structure is going to be underwater when I'm done. It'll be about 3 inches underwater, and the rest will be just dirt on top holding it in place. So one other thing I can show you was the Duck Island version 1 that I did 4 years ago, maybe. It's hiding back here in shame. Here it is. So basically here I just used ABS pipe, and I put a wire rack over the top, and then there's like this landscape stuff, and I just threw straw on it. And it actually, a duck built a nest on there, and it had about 20 eggs in there. And then one day a heron came by and landed on it, and just the whole thing dunked underwater. The duck gave up, and that was that. So not nearly enough flotation there. The flotation on the version 2 island is like, I think it's 12 5-gallon buckets that are in there. I can think of about 15 other better ways to make a flotation, but that was what I went with. So once I bring that in, I'll probably salvage those buckets. They should still be good. They might be a little dirty, but they all had lids too, waterproof lids, so I'll pull those back. Anyway, that's it for this video, and keep tuned. We're gonna keep working on this starting next week here.